left, so we'll go to the gentlelady from Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for hosting this hearing, and thank you to our witnesses for their time. With tensions over trade escalating and the Chinese vice premier headed to Washington Thursday for resumed talks, I appreciate this timely opportunity to learn more about China's attempts to erode America's influence. I come from a trading state, the state of Missouri, where exports support 88,000 jobs. That's 18% above the national average. I strongly believe that China must be held accountable for its malign trade and investment policies, but we must be targeted. American consumers and businesses shouldn't be the ones shouldering the consequences. I believe our trade policy toward China should be aimed at curbing the predatory behavior of China's state-owned enterprises, these SOEs. Dr. Kleiman, how should U.S. negotiators address this issue in talks?
It's a great question, certainly very timely. I mean, my view is that ultimately U.S. and Chinese economic objectives are squarely non-aligned, that China ultimately wants to dominate kind of the key industries of the future. And if you look at sort of any deal on the table already this week, it became apparent the Chinese were walking back from their commitments. To me, it's deeply unsurprising. I think any deal, if one is struck, will be unsatisfying, I think, to the House, to the Senate, to the American people, given the nature of what China wants relative to the United States. So I don't think there's a straightforward sort of answer to your question. I mean, I think at the end of the day, it will be about sort of protecting the industries here where China's going to exploit us, trading in select areas that perhaps are not as competitive with them. But I don't think there's sort of a very easy or painless path forward.
Well, clearly, and obviously the vice premier is on his way, and the president's saber rattling. So we'll see where if we make any inroads here this week. I want to make sure, though, that my farmers, and my consumers, are not inadvertently and overly affected by this. Beijing allows its state-owned enterprises to borrow at extremely low interest rates from public financial institutions. As a result, SOEs have dominated project bids in Southeast Asia, a primary target of the Belt and Road Initiative. I co-chair of the Congressional ASEAN Caucus, and I'm deeply concerned that these policies are designed to draw Southeast Asian countries into Beijing's sphere of influence. Dr. Kleiman, how should the United States work with Southeast Asian countries to prevent these state-owned enterprises from boxing out more responsible investors?
Congress has already taken an important step in that direction, passing the BUILD Act. I would say I'm cautiously optimistic with our new Development Finance Corporation that some of the tools it has, including new tools like equity, as well as, of course, the new lending cap, if targeted, could help to move the needle. I think many of the countries in Southeast Asia understand what Chinese SOEs bring is not necessarily well engaged with their economy. There's not the skills transfer they want, the debt issue. So I think the problem for the U.S. until now has been we didn't have an alternative easily available. That may change with this new DFC. I think there's a critical role for Congress to make sure the DFC is lending in some of these countries in support of U.S. companies in competitive sectors. But I would say I'm optimistic that we now actually have that tool.
Dr. Stolman, the Xi regime faces internal pressure stemming from demographic issues, simmering dissent, and high expectations regarding economic performance. Given these dynamics, I think it's important to remember that the Belt and Road Initiative was originally a domestically oriented initiative designed to spread economic growth to quickly growing cities in China's interior. Belt and Road Initiative has now evolved far beyond its domestic origins and threatens to undermine democracy and good governance in developing countries. Do you think this shift was opportunistic or accidental? And how should China's internal pressures inform our thinking on the Belt and Road Initiative?
Thank you for that question. I think it's absolutely right to point out the fact that the Belt and Road initially was very much domestically focused to benefit China's West in particular. I think it's important to note that why, in terms of why it's become such a big deal in terms of external economic engagement, China's looking to create external markets to be able to sell its goods elsewhere. They're also trying to export its overcapacity in a lot of industries. But it's important to note that actually, when you look at the data, the Belt and Road actually has not been very beneficial for China's domestic economy going forward. What I think we need to look to is going forward, as I mentioned in my remarks, if China's economy continues to face mounting challenges, as we see that it is with the massive amounts of debt that they're taking on domestically, China is going to continue, I think, to look to the Belt and Road as a way to get them out of this problem, right? To create new markets and also to try to continue to saddle countries with these debts. And to come back to your question to Dr. Kleiman, it's not just that SOEs are getting subsidized and therefore able to come in with lower bids. It's that the Chinese policy banks that are financing these projects are then going in with these governments and saying, okay, and there's going to be one bid and it's going to be from a Chinese SOE, or maybe two bids, both of them Chinese SOEs. And so you're going to have a situation where you have very inflated costs with corruption inherent in all of these deals. So it's not just the subsidizing, it's also the opaque nature in the way in which these deals are done. And to expose that through civil society and investigative journalism is really critical.
Thank you, Dr. Schulman. I know my time has elapsed. I have a really awesome question for you, Ms. Chaudhry, and I'm going to make sure that it gets submitted to you. It's about India that I'd love if you could respond in writing. And I thank the chair for his indulgence.
We all look forward to